Welcome to Stay Humble podcast, Eric Yates. How are you feeling today?
Ooh, how am I feeling today? Oh, well, nice to meet you again, Dave. Well, emotions, as you well know, are something we all often think about in the present. We tend to focus on the past and the future, but how I'm feeling today, like I am most days, pretty awesome. Just to use that Americanism.
That's great to hear that. And firstly, what I want to talk about, obviously you are known as the Behaviour Guru. How did you first come about that? So, like, for the listeners, how can you just give a bit entail of how that came about in terms of your background?
Well, I mean, my background started many years ago working with young offenders in the outdoor education industry. Then I moved into residential childcare after spending a stint working in the States with drug users. And spent a lot of time in residential childcare working with children with what were classed as social and emotional behavioural difficulties before moving on to becoming a teacher. And for the last 21 years, we've done nothing else but mainly sort of training organisations around behaviour management. But my interpretation of a behaviour guru is everybody is one.
That's really good to hear that. And what influenced you? Was there people like at home that influenced you, like your parents, or was it what that influenced you to go into that sort of career path?
Well, I suppose it was back in the early days. It was my mother. I was unemployed, and my mother found an article in a newspaper and said, "Why don't you get involved in youth work?" And I thought, "Well, what's this?" But I was in my age, a grand old age of sort of 17, 18, got involved in informal education or issue-based youth work, and ran a project for 3 years working with young offenders where we had a 95% success rate of getting children off crime. And we got lots of money thrown at us because we're good at what we did. And many people asked us, well, how are you doing that? And most of the time, we hadn't got a clue. We hadn't got a clue what we're doing. We're just having fun. Taking kids across to Romania and Bulgaria and throwing them off cliffs is what we used to do most of the time. But we convert kids into more useful members of society. So it was that kind of got me into the field of I suppose, being an agent of change of young people and influencing and empowering young people right up to the current career of empowering staff to work with said individuals or young people or challenging behaviour.
And from obviously attending your workshop, I got told the story that you told, which was about when you actually ended up working in America. Like, how did that opportunity come about?
Well, once I'd finished a 3 year programme working youth service across in the UK, I kind of was a bit headhunted a little bit by an organisation in the States looking for a substance misuse worker. And because some of my work with young offenders was around substance misuse and alcohol abuse in relation to crime, I spent around a number of months in America working across there doing similar sort of things, but looking very much at addictive behaviours, everything from cannabis, which I know people think isn't addictive, although it tends to lead on to stronger strains and all sorts of things, right down to heroin and methadone and various other sorts of implements that children were injecting with. And again, similar sort of thing is letting young people think differently and actually see the world differently and look at creating opportunities for change out of the current patterns that we're involved in. And whilst across in the States, I got involved very much in, which is another passion of mine, which is NLP or Neuro Linguistic Programming, where I first came across it. And that gave me more tools in the tool bag to support people making positive changes in their life.
And like, whereabouts, like in America, did you go across to in terms of like the areas, like the suburbs and places like that? Where did you like kind of base yourself?
Well, I was most of the place I was working in was in Ohio, downtown Glenwood, Ohio, which was kind of the sort of north of the country. And that was very much the area we were based in within the sort of just near, not far from the sort of Canadian border.
No, that's really good to know that that's the area that you was able to make such a change in that area, working with them people. And what was it like for sort of seeing them sort of changes as well, like working with them people?
Well, I think change happens when anybody comes along and brings, I suppose, a slightly different slant on people's experiences. I mean, for me, I'm a great believer that there's no such thing as a bad experience. They all become internal resources and resources that we can use to further our life. And I guess it's how we then able to rethink and reframe those resources because it makes us stronger. And often by having conversations and actually experiences with young people, you create influence and opportunity for change, mainly because of how you inspire them to think differently.
And how did you feel about working in America? Was it very, obviously going from working up north in England to going and working in America? What was it? What was the feelings for yourself? Like being able to experience them opportunities?
That was more communication difficulties than feelings. Being a little Geordie lad, the moment you open your mouth in some of the place in America, you had to modify one's accent in order to be heard because they didn't understand what you were talking about. But I think a lot of it was very much around the fact that that was a good grounding base for to take all the work we used to work with youth work in Britain across to America and find that the same patterns and tools and experience that you give young people to, I suppose, just to see an alternative opportunity, an alternative life. And I think for me, it was exciting, it was engaging, it was sometimes very dangerous because of some of the environments that you were working within on the streets. And if you've ever seen the film Boys in the Hood, there was areas in that locality
Yeah, I've seen that film.
which were very similar to that. But for me, it was a case of it was a good grounding for to continue on with the career that I've been very passionate about for the last 20 odd years.
No, that's really good that it's had that effect in terms of grounding and obviously being able to work with them people. And one of the biggest things you kind of came out about in terms of your workshops is about state, particularly emotional state. Can you sort of like, for people that are listening, can you go into a bit more detail about the emotional state that people need to consider?
Well, it's a bit like when you start this interview, we're asking people how they feel. Interesting enough, most people don't actually know how they feel at the time. They actually get more emotions are based on reflection or anxiety about the future. And the thing about emotional state is that we have all access to a range of states which are linked to breathing, physiology, and ultimately emotion. And one of the things I'm quite passionate about, and certainly with teachers and educators and carers, is to give them access or a little of understanding about the amount of states they have available to them. I mean, one of the things that we discussed when the workshop was the thing about being confident and being in a confident state. I would argue that everybody has a confident state. And it's that confident state which feels like complete self-assuredness, self-ability, confidence comes from that feeling calm and secure. We've all got it. It's just sometimes we don't have access to it. And there's things that we allow to shake our state, and that might be internal dialogue, it might be thoughts leading on to emotions, changes in breathing, and that ultimately affects our performance because we get caught up in the moment in the anxiety rather than actually understand what the anxiety is there for. For example, if you hold your breath, and when people go into a bit of panic, it automatically triggers off cortisol, adrenaline to trigger off the limbic system to go into a state of panic. Yet if we actually get ourselves in a calm state and breathe deeply, we get access to a whole range of resources that are removed from our ability to actually get access to because simply our breathing rate at the time.
Yeah, I would agree in terms of that. We need to be more present because I think a lot of people, like you said, they're going to sort of like their past or future state, which gives sort of them anxiety situations, or they might give basically them sort of feelings of in terms of like a depressive state as well, like in terms of looking back and stuff like that. So they're quite things that people need to sort of in an emotional state probably really need to try and become more present. Is that the sort of things that you try to teach with NLP as well?
Well, for me, I mean, being present is everything. It's like having a conversation now that we're having in this interview. And I think if you got, the situation we're having an interview with somebody and you're actually concerned about what you're going to say next and your mind's racing rather than actually just enjoying being in the present. But for me, most of the time, I spend a lot of time teaching people about, sort of managing challenging behaviour. And one of the first things is in order for somebody to connect with another human being, you've got to be in the present moment, but also to connect fully with using things like rapport and unconscious connection. I think sometimes what we are unaware of is we get affected by the emotional state of other people, often beyond our awareness. We go to a state of panic and then find it more difficult to bring somebody down to a matching or calm state. The more we can train staff to be present and able to choose the level of state and the physiology and the breathing best suited for the situation, all they've got to do then is get the young person back to being present because they're often in a state of flux or a state of anxiety or a state of panic or a state of aggression. And it's about matching those two together, getting those two to be connected and bring them back to present state and a more resourceful state to manage any sort of feelings and emotion happening at the time.
Yeah, and a colleague of mine wanted to sort of ask you about this in terms of currently, obviously, we've got situations of lockdown and we have got situations of isolation for people. Has there been sort of a different response in terms of the current circumstances that you have used would use a different approach?
Well, I think the lockdown itself has provided a lot of challenges for a number of people. I think there's an old adage about the fact that worry more about the things that you can control and worry less about the things that you can't control. There's going to be certain things that are beyond our control. I guess your emotions, your feeling, and your state is something that's well within our control. And I think it's when it's working with staff mate who've, issues around getting the virus, so I suppose that's a risk. There's all these other thoughts and anxiety and internal dialogue that create that level of anxiety. And if we broaden out the wider picture, lockdown itself meant that we've now moved across to digital platforms to get our message across for most part, and staff that are working within their bubbles and schools we know statistically are very, very low in terms of risk. So I think there's so much stuff there in the media and so much stuff there out there on the internet that influence our thinking, therefore influence our thoughts and emotions, that can lead to a greater state of panic than the actual reality of the situation is. And I'm not to kind of dumb down about the seriousness of the virus, but I think our young people, I've got a 6-year-old at home at the minute who I'm homeschooling. Now for her, she's missing out an awful lot of ability to interact and socialise with friends of her own age. Yes, it's nice to spend a lot of time with her, but I have serious concerns about the mental health this is going to play out on our next generation of young people which have missed out on that ability to socialise, interact with children of their own age, and the development that they're missing out on. So I think we've got to be a little bit of catch up. But I think in general scheme of things, this time will pass, and we'll get through it, which is what people are saying. But I think the day to day is we're giving people the ability to just every now and again chunk up to what I call the wider picture, rather than get caught in the semantics or the anxiety of the moment.
No, that's great. And like you say, I agree in terms of like that sort of social aspect. It's going to have a huge detriment to sort of the generation of now in terms of like I refer to a quote from sort of Stoicism that we are social animals and children are going to really need to be able to socially reintegrate with people again and stuff like that. They're going to be some of the biggest challenges in terms of with that, and obviously again sharing their emotions and stuff like that, which you have touched on before in your workshops, and how important it is for them to build that, because if you don't have that, how can we build rapport?
Yeah, and I think emotions. I mean, emotions are complicated. I think when we did the workshop with you guys recently in your particular service, is asking the question, what is an emotion? And most adults will struggle to identify what that is. And the thing about emotions, you could actually argue, one of my favourite quotes of all time is that, or sayings of all time, is that emotions actually have no meaning until you attach a meaning to it. And if you take anger, for example, most of us have the ability to be angry. But is it possible that somebody else can make you angry? Well, I would argue not. It's how we reference that based on the stories and experience we've had linked to that emotion. Only when we start to investigate and look at the potential possibility of taking that emotion and creating more stories and states associated with it and more outputs, that we become, I suppose, have more choice in how we experience emotion. But I also remember my daughter coming back from nursery, first session, and she came back and she said, "Daddy, this is happy and this is sad." And my response was, "Is it?" Because there's a little bit more to it. Because 2 days later she said, "Daddy, I'm really sad." But the rest of the physiology didn't say that. There was no shape in
Yeah.
the shoulders, the eye contact wasn't sad. She was just learning about these things called emotions. And me and my daughter talk about emotions virtually every day, more so at the moment, because I wanted to understand this thing called emotional resilience, and emotional intelligence, which has been around since the 20s, and rephrased more exclusively in Daniel Goleman's book in 1995.
And what I just want to kind of ask is something else in terms of this as well. Is I've recently reading Quiet by Susan Cain, and it touches on about temperance and personality. So temperance is more like an inborn or biological, and personality is a complex brew in terms from like cultural influences. So obviously, like they say about temperance is foundation, and personality is like the building. What's your thoughts in terms of that? Like in terms of schools having to work with children in terms of trying to help them with these sort of things, because obviously, if it's inborn, we are able to, we can only change the sort of cultural things in terms of their personality.
Well, I'm going to be a little bit careful what I say here because I think with schools, I've had some interesting debates with sort of senior leaders of schools who seem to think that, the school in some respects does it still have a purpose in our society, because society has changed significantly in a short space of time. And what I mean by that, schools were initially born out of the whole need to educate the masses in work practices in order to go out and find a job in a set factory regime or type of employment. And society was very stuck in terms of its layers, if you like. Whereas now, I guess what we should be teaching our children is emotional intelligence and resilience and ability to adapt to situations, because the labour market now, you will transform and have to reshape yourself and almost to have a number of different versions of you to adapt to work in the workplace that you're currently going into or about to go into. I suppose it's a bit like Madonna, who kept reinventing herself. As human beings now, we have to have multiple versions of us with that level of adaptability to be, I suppose, creative in the labour market. And personality is something, then not people think it's fixed or stayed. But I think your preferences and how you act and respond change depending on the environment you're in. And we all know, I think one of the things I've said over years with young people, we know that young people's behaviour will change and the young person will change. Their temper and their personality will even change depending on the environments they're in and the people that are around, really, because of how we make them feel. And I think it's very much around children taking and adults taking, therefore, as they become to adulthood, the ability to modify their thoughts and their process and their physiology and connect with people at a level which is applicable to the environment they're in. And I think schools need to play a lot of catch up in terms of how we teach kids to collaborate, be individuals, and to become successfully emotionally resilient into human beings once they leave the education process. And I don't know whether education is doing that at the moment.
No, I think resilience is something that I would totally agree with yourself, Eric, in terms of, I think that's something that we need to teach them to expect what to get in the real world. If we are to teach them that basically they can't be wrong and stuff like that, we've got to be able to make them realise that in the outside world we're not going to get every job that we go for, we're not going to get every decision that we want. We've got to understand that we've got to have some resilience to respond to that. Is that?
Yeah, I think but it's also the fact that, again, as we go through, if you look at yourself, there may be multiple different versions of Dave Palmer. Everything from the work Dave Palmer to the social Dave Palmer to the one that hangs around with, goes out, has tea with the vicar or sees the grandmother. Have multiple versions of us in society. And I think having that ability to adapt to fit into any team or any group, or to find your passion. There's a lot of stuff on the internet now about finding your passion. And doing what makes you feel great. But at the same point, if that opportunity doesn't come, either you make the opportunity or deal with the fact that you deal with the disappointment that life hasn't dealt the hand that you want, or the job opportunity hasn't come that you want. And now we're filled with the internet and television with, I've just been watching a back run of The Voice, and people dealing with the fact that they didn't get chosen by the coaches. I think society now puts a lot of young people under an awful lot of pressure. And really got to really up our game about getting to chunk up the bigger picture and seeing that emotional resilience is something that everybody needs in order to survive with certainly this current pandemic, but with life per se.
Yeah, and another thing that you mentioned really greatly on your workshop was about in terms of children, so to not do something, and yet they go and do the behaviour that we don't want. Obviously, at the moment, we're in a lockdown situation where we're telling people not to go places, not to do that, and yet as humans, we are still responding to them, sort of being told these instructions of what not to do, and yet as humans, we go and do the actions that we're told not to. You obviously mentioned that in your workshop. Is that something certainly in terms of the behaviours again of people in terms of just doing the opposites?
Well, I think, it's a bit like anything. It's like if you walk down a corridor and there's a sign saying, don't touch wet paint. The first thing people do is go and touch it to see actually the fact that it does exactly what it says on the tin. And I suppose, in a sense, the moment you tell somebody not to do something, especially with children, I know a lot of parents might be homeschooling at the moment and finding that it's a bit of a challenge, mainly because children and parents are far more emotionally attached than they would do the teacher and the educator and the child in the educational setting. But I think it's very much around the fact that it's about people generally prefer to do things if they feel it's their choice than it is something that they're forced into. And I think this third, fourth, whatever lockdown we're on at the moment, the pressure to conform and do as you're told is really starting to play out on some people, and I'm struggling with the whole process of it. But I think, me personally, I think it's very much around for people to see the benefit of what benefits is ours. But at the same time, people tend to swallow the pill better if they feel it's their choice to do something, and they're supporting a wider cause than it is something that they've been forced to do. And for me, most of my career is about teaching schools the fact that what we should be looking at is expectation and choice rather than rules, discipline, and boundaries. And I've had many debates around behaviour management systems and charts and reward charts and sanction charts, which work for the vast majority. 90% of kids will conform to them. But the ones that tend to be most challenging are those children that generally don't fit in those systems. And we have to find ways of motivating them. And I guess that's how you do that on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think that comes down to a number of factors, doesn't it, in terms of like the people that work with them on a day-to-day basis, like getting to know what they're like and stuff like that, and making sure that they are in an environment that can potentially basically get their best state, like you talked about before. Obviously, being present and making sure they're in that sort of state to do what you want them to do as well as a big factor in that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think it's also for me, it's about being real and actually creating experiences. Because we teach emotional resilient children by creating experiences. The more experience we create for young people, the more opportunity we have for that emotional resilience. And for example, over the summer period, I think I quoted on the day we spent with you yourself and your colleagues, was a young lad was out with a 14-year-old lad, never played rounders before, and he said, "I can't hit the ball." And my response was, "Yeah, you're right, you can't." And he was quite shocked by that. And as was his parents, they say, well, aren't you meant to praise kids? Well, no, the reality is you can't hit the ball, son. That's a fact, right? And that for him was a bit of a sort of a state shocker, or put him in a state of shock to say somebody's been brutally honest with you. I said, but I'll tell you what you can do, though. If you carry on hitting it, at some point, the probability of you connecting with that ball is going to increase. And he swung the bat, till eventually hit it with such force he had to blind of the shot. Now, through experience, he's now got the belief that actually, if I try hard enough, I'm able to do it. And I think sometimes a lot of parents and educators often say, "Oh, give it your best shot. You can do it. Don't feel disappointed." No, sometimes we're going to teach kids the harsh reality that you believe you can't do something, you might be right.
No, I think a bit brutally honesty it does do some real good in terms of certainly building, like say, that resilience and understanding like that initial shock. And then, like you said on these stories, that they've figured out how to hit the ball eventually, and that's how we all learn to do things as kids. Obviously, we all learn to say like we learn to walk, we learn through failure when we get back up and stuff like that. So I think that is something that we just should be trying to progress more. And obviously, with you being an NLP instructor as well, what are things that do you feel that you could pass on to people at this current moment in terms of helping them during working maybe in schools or working in just general people as well, like during this time where they're having to spend time at home or locked down and restricted in terms of their day-to-day life?
Well, I think the biggest one for me was first of all is have the ability to be sensory and have that sense security, in which case to be able to work out what state the person is in and whether or not that state is potentially useful. I mean, for example, it's a lot of people might be somewhat. I'm not too keen on the term depressed because there's different forms of depression, from clinically depressed. I think people can get down from time to time, people get sad from time to time, and people get caught in the moment. I would certainly offer any parents advice by saying any opportunity to have a bit of a giggle and a bit of fun in the odd break where you get out in nature and go for a walk or go and do something with that, you connect with the child and teach the state of calm, relax, some maybe some form of meditation or something of calmness takes away some of the anxiety from time to time and grounds people again. I think people get so head up and allowed to be compounded by the situation, and every now and again it's useful to take a bit of time out to be present and to enjoy a moment, whether sitting in a park or going out for a walk or just sitting doing something sedentary activity like a jigsaw puzzle or something where you just spend a bit of quality time with the child and mix it up and do lots of range of activities, because it's not often the activity that's the issue. It's the state the child is in. So I think certainly in this pandemic, it's about creating a range of states for your child to experience. But one of the most important states is to be present, to be calm. And I would certainly advise looking at some form of yoga, and there's lots of videos online, or some form of meditation, at least 1 or 2 periods a day to reground people.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Like I said, the activities in terms of getting people more present and stuff like that is the, and and obviously you mentioned there like just being able to get out and do activities in terms and as well with that, that's obviously going to form some good conversations as well with them sort of in them situations. If they're in that present state, they're going to be obviously more open to talk and obviously develop a better rapport with people. That's a really important thing that people need to do, I think. And is there sort of maybe 3 particular activities you would suggest maybe to do at this time?
Well, I mean, the wonderful thing about the internet can be a bit of a curse or a blessing. I think there's a lot of resources out there on the internet that allow parents and children to spend time in the same presence and join activity. Because I know that it's great. I'm based in the northeast. We've got a lot of open spaces. I'm in a little village outside a major town. There's lots of open space to get out of. I appreciate that people down in somewhere like in the middle of a city like London, which maybe is in a small flat or bedroom without the outside space, it's a bit more of a challenge. But I think it's for me, it's very much around realizing that there's one thing that's always there, and that's choice. We've always got choice to change our internal dialogue, to change our perception, change our thoughts, ultimately changing how we feel. And a number of people that I work with over the years saying, I just want things to be better. Well, actually, in fact, the wonderful thing about the unconscious mind, the difference, I guess, between Neuro Linguistic Programming and CBT is NLP is more interested in what they work with the unconscious mind as opposed to conscious thought. But often aren't always conscious of the thoughts and the emotions that are at the time we're having that effect or ability to see the world in the bigger picture. So again, we mentioned being present, which is clearly an issue, but also realizing that the fact that just by starting to modify some of our thoughts, we can create more choice too. In terms of, first recognizing, okay, there's things beyond my control. Why can I be concerned about it? What can I control? Well, I can control what I watch. I can control what I do. I can control where I am and what I'm thinking. And I think with things like meditation and mindfulness, many people have said, well, I can't meditate because I can't clear my mind. You don't need to. You just suddenly have to be present. And once we adopt these skills and teach our young people and actually engage in these activities, our young people, I think that's going to get a lot of people through the pandemic and a lot through this very difficult period. And I think that's the only way forward is to spend quality time with the loved ones that we have got in our presence and near to us, or doing it through an online media where we connect with as many people as possible.
No, I think that's a really great point, Eric. And like I said, one of the big things I think I've took from this sort of last year has been the terms of time, just having that more time for spending it being present with people, or just having opportunity to sort of focus on the things that matter more. I think they're the really big takeaways in terms of this opportunity, and certainly what you've advised there in terms of looking for things to find that presence as well. And I just wanted to kind of ask you a few final questions. And firstly, I'd like to ask is, what does it mean to be human?
What does it mean to be human? I think therefore I am. I know I've watched a couple of videos on your channel about what it means to be human. And I know that I'm very much in the line of that we are part of the animal kingdom. I would certainly agree with the fact that we're, as much of an animal kingdom as an orangutan or a gibbon or some other kind of marsupial or another creature on the planet. I think lockdown has done a great job for actually reducing the carbon footprint and having a bit of impact in the environment. I think for me, being human is the ability to think, to connect, and to empower ourselves to improve the lives of others, which is probably classed as different from the other part of the animal kingdom. And I think a lot of the times we have emotions such as guilt, we have emotions such as anxiety, we have emotions such as resentment over other people's success. I think we need to be a little bit more thankful and grateful. And I think as human beings, the more we're thankful for what we've got, and that we're here and we're together and we're still alive and we can connect. For me, it's about the joy and support we can give our other fellow human beings, which takes us slightly outside the animal kingdom. Although the animals show compassion, I think human beings, empathetic compassion and empowering others is a skill that we all should develop, and being grateful for having that at our disposal.
No, that's a really great answer. I definitely agree that we need to be more empathetic and show that more. And finally, I'd like to ask is what keeps you to stay humble?
What keeps me stay humble? I suppose I'm thankful that as namesakes. I tell people that I'm a behaviour guru, and I have fantastic days every day. And whilst there's times where we also go through difficult times, every now and again appreciate that there's always somebody us not worse off than us. And I think some respects, for me, it's about how we can be grateful, be appreciated, and then offer that support to those that require it. Keeps you grounded, keeps you humble, and keeps you human. And for me, there's nothing greater pleasure than having a conversation with somebody, either there be a hypnotic conversation or a meta model conversation. For more of that, check out Behaviour Guru on YouTube. But for me, it's about how we can just have a conversation with somebody and open up that choice for them. But the benefit or the pleasure I get from it is taking absolutely no credit whatsoever for supporting the individual to help them make the choices and get access to resources they've already got. And that to me is the passion I like to share. The fact that when people I work with people, it's them saying, "You've really helped me." So not at all. All we've done is facilitated and you helping yourself. And that for me keeps me humble.
That's a really great answer, Eric. And finally, I just want to give you sort of a platform for my listeners and viewers in terms of where they want to look Eric Yates up, the Behaviour Guru up in terms of online. Is it through your YouTube channel or?
Well, at the moment, like most things, lockdown has been an incredibly busy time. There is a YouTube channel if they search Behaviour Guru on YouTube, and this video will be there along with a couple of others. I've got a number in the pipeline, but I've been a bit busy doing and supporting the people. The website itself needs a bit of work. Other than that, you can catch me on my other website, which is inter-face.co.uk, where we tend to have most of our training business, as well as actually a couple of other channels which I might stick up on list after on. I also got a channel called Geordie Bike Tours, which me and a friend of mine do riding motorbikes. Listeners checking out that one. A couple of Geordie bikers just shooting the what's it, just talking about rubbish on motorbikes. So we spend a little bit of time online, but there's more stuff to come. And I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to be coming on. Stay humble.
No, thank you, Eric. I really appreciate you. Some really good insight, and I'd certainly think the things that we've covered in this podcast are certainly going to help people during this lockdown. And I'd like to hopefully think that it will also help the education in terms of people in schools and education who might be struggling at this time in terms of them things. And hopefully that they will find being present is going to be a big thing for them.
My pleasure.
And that was Eric Yates from Behaviour Guru. Thank you for listening.